Today's picture booking episode features host Nadia Salomon and author Meera Sriram. Here's a taste of where today's conversation goes.
But I think for me, one of the main reasons I chose to even write picture books was because we talk a lot about representation and diversity and inclusion, all of that, right? But I somehow feel that we think there's a certain age to talk about that, or there are certain, and it's sort of like more easier to see these things happening in, like, say, for books for grown-ups or for older kids and YA. But I like, it is like, I don't see that as often being done in literature for the younger kids. Mm-hmm. So we still have so much work to do in that area. Like, like there's so many more stories that we need to tell in, like, for kids in the picture book age.
Welcome to the Picture Booking Podcast, a show that celebrates children's books by chatting with those who make them. Whether you're a fan of this medium or a creator, you'll find inspiration and insights here. To make guest suggestions and picture book recommendations, subscribe to the Picture Booking newsletter at picturebooking.com/listen. And now, let's join Nadia Salomon and Meera Sriram as they discuss today's featured book, Garden in My Hands, a touching story about a mother and daughter bonding over henna and memories.
I feel like I'm about to explode at the seams because this book is extremely special, not just for you, but also for our critique group, but also for just, anyone who, relates to South Indian culture, because this book is coming from our region and the things that we do. And so tell us a little bit about that.
So the story in this book is about a little girl having henna done on her hands. And as her mother is applying henna, she is sharing some of her family stories and some special memories. So the family is Indian American, and you'll see that the characters are dressed in lehenga, sari, wearing bindi. There's Hindi spoken, which is a very popular language in India. And there is also a beautiful spread of a gorgeous wedding scene. So there's a South Asian wedding happening. And my hope is that it will offer a mirror to children of South Asian descent, to Indian American families, to immigrant families, and also to South Asian cultures.
And what's the other reason why it's special, Meera?
So this is truly special from just thinking about how it was born, where it was born, right? It was literally born in one of our critique retreats. So Nadia, you're part of my critique group, and you know how much I love our critique group. Yes. And it's sort of like the soul of my writing, right? And we have this tradition in our critique group to meet up for these retreats at least twice a year. Ideally, we want it to be every season, but I think we have done it a few times in a year now. And we all spend an entire weekend together where we are just catching up, chatting over meals, brainstorming together, supporting each other in our writing and telling of stories, right? Creating, revising, polishing. So we do that a couple of times a year. And this story, I brought this story to one of the retreats that happened with my critique group. And like always, they were excited. They gave me hope. They supported me through the revising and polishing. And today it's a book here. Yeah, and the fact that it happened at a virtual meeting, which I'll talk about later, how that happened, but the fact that it happened at a virtual meeting over Zoom, you sort of like helping me revise. And now to sit here with you holding the physical book in my hands is just surreal. This is a surreal moment. And it's an ode to friendship. It's an ode to supporting each other in our journey. It's an ode to telling stories together. It is a celebration of community.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps because I remember when we first heard the story, it's almost the same, but at the same time it was different because we didn't realize as you were writing it that it could have the two tracks that the story currently has. Because originally the focus was mostly on the henna and the process. And then the other part was so poetic, we were like, but you need to add that in, figure out a way to make it work.
Right, right.
And you were like, you guys, come on. And we're like, no, Meera, we're gonna stick your feet to the fire. You have to make them work. And when you finally put the two together, and now we have a garden in my hands, and it's just so beautifully done. And for me, I love how you have like that parallel with the two stories. And I was like, seriously, if you send this out and someone does not pick this up, then I don't even know like what to say. And sure enough, you know,
Oh,
when you shared it with your agent and you shared it with your team, they were like, oh, this is great. And tell us what happened next.
no, you're right. Like you guys pushed me, sort of all like always brought out the best out of me, right? And there were these two tracks that I was struggling with, sort of like the poetic, the more lyrical text with the ancestry and the heritage, and then the actual process of henna, the girl getting her henna done and the hands turning like in that beautiful shade in the end. But sort of like weaving those two together was a little tricky, and I think in the end it all worked out. And yeah, my agent loved it, and she shared it, she sent it out. And when she shared it with a bunch of editors, I think we had multiple interest from a few different editors. And then it ended up being picked up by my wonderful editor, Rotem Moskovich at Knopf at Penguin Random House. And she has a wonderful team, and she really had a great vision for this book. And she, in fact, helped me tweak a few things in the text towards the editing phase. And she brought Sandhya on board that we both loved. And this has turned out so beautiful.
I know. And, you know, Sandhya's work is incredible. I mean, she's great with color, she's great with texture, and she's great with like capturing, you know, emotion, like in some of the scenes that are in the you know, that we have on the pages. So,
Right.
you know, this book, I literally, it was so hard to choose like a favorite page or a favorite spread, but I would have to say to you, my favorite spread, um, why don't you show us what the favorite spread is, and then we can talk a little bit about it. It's the one that shows
Sure.
the ancestors,
Right. Yeah,
and then
yeah, that's
the
mine
use of
too.
color.
Right. That's mine. That's mine too. But you're right about Sandhya. The thing I really like about her work is her storytelling. So particularly with this manuscript, the text is sparse, right? The words are lyrical. It's sort of poetic. So it's not a whole lot of words in it. And so there's so much creative space that I wish to share with the artist, and she has really harnessed that. She brings her own storytelling, she brings her own imagination to the scene, and every spread obviously looks gorgeous. Like you said, the use of colors, the use of patterns,
Yeah.
particularly the floral motifs in this book, and with henna being at the center of it all, I think she's done an amazing job with the designs and patterns and motives with the henna itself. And my favorite spread, actually, there are two for two different reasons, but I think the one that we both picked would be this. Yeah, I
Yes.
was chatting with Nadia earlier, and we were sort of like talking about our favorite spreads, and it so happened that we both picked this one. Yeah,
Yeah.
this.
Well, this one, remember when we first read it, I always
Mhm,
told you this was my favorite
mhm.
line or stanza that was in the
Right.
book. And I was just like, oh my, like it gave me goosebumps when I read it. And then to
Mhm,
see it illustrated, I mean, it's one thing when you um see a manuscript,
mhm.
bare bones, like
Right,
you just see the
right,
text, but then to see it's kind of
right.
like you gave birth to a baby and we're all like, ooh, we love this, like
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
you are you're clearly like, as Serena, one of our critic partners, calls it, like she's always like, I'm auntie to this book.
Yes, I'm auntie to
So
this
you're
book.
all like aunties to this book, right?
Yeah. And that
Yeah, so
page, I mean, just to see it
right,
illustrated is just, it's
right,
really intense because I love how not only did you talk about like your ancestors, but like she illustrated it with like ancestry,
right,
from the littles all the way into, old
right,
age. And it was just, is it
right.
all that you imagined it to be?
Uh, it's more than what I had imagined it to be. Like, in fact, like when I wrote the words, it's usually the reaction, right? Like, I see my people who read the words react, and then that sort of like validates my own thinking when the words poured out. But I did not sort of like have a particular image in my head for these words or this spread. But when I saw it the first time, I broke down. I had tears streaming down my face. I still get choked up when I talk about it. When I try to like relive the moment, I can still feel it in me. How emotional I was when I first saw this spread. This is yeah. I still get teary when I see it. It really really tugs at the heart. Just seeing our a spread that captures like who we are today, where we come from, and our
Hmm.
ancestors, what we call home, and our people. Yeah, so it gives me goosebumps. So that's one of my favorites, top favorite spreads. The second one would be this spread here, the mom.
Yes,
Uh,
this is awesome.
like sort of like helping the kid take care of her henna, because the little girl cares so deeply about the henna now, because it's also carrying all the stories that the mom has shared, and she doesn't want to smudge a single story on her hand. And now the mom is actually feeding her and like getting her hair done before bedtime. She's brushing, and this takes me back to my own memories as a child when I had henna done. And this is exactly what my mom used to do. Like, we would have, she would apply my henna after, like, she got back from work. She would like
Hmm.
grind the leaves. She would like set it aside for some time. And then when she was done with the chores, she would like take me to the veranda. We would sit on the cement floor, and she would do this, just telling me about her day. Or sometimes she would just like, I would see her face sort of like narrow, and she would look closely at like those intricate designs that she's doing on my
Hmm.
hand. Or sometimes she would just like be patting and pressing, like so involved and engaged in what she's doing. And I would just be staring at her face, and then when we're done, she would start like thinking about like, okay, what next? I need to feed you your dinner. Like, okay, are you wearing the right clothes? I don't want you to stain anything in the house. Like, don't go near the bed. Like, you stay away from that and this. And then like she would
Hmm.
prepare like a straw, like with the straw mat. She would prepare it on the open terrace, the warm open terrace above our bedroom. And she would do all this. And this just, it's such a sweet, precious memory for me to think back to those summer nights when my mom would apply henna, and it was such a big deal for me to keep it so carefully. So the next morning, they would all turn out the way she had intended it to be. And yeah, so this is very close to my heart, just because it reminds me of my own childhood.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And like anyone who's ever had henna done, they know
Mhm.
the process, and sometimes, we would use hair dryers to like make it bake faster.
Right.
And then, the constant squeezing of the lemon juice over it to
Right,
be like,
right.
hey, let's make it darker.
I know. There are always these theories, right? That I would be like, how do people come up with this? Did
Right,
someone conduct like a scientific experiment or what? But there would
right.
always be like add tea leaves, like a tea concoction in it to make it darker, or like
Yeah.
you said, like squeeze the lime all
Mhm.
over, like so it sticks, and there's a
Yeah.
chemical reaction that would just like make the shade a tad more red.
And yep, it like all the spreads really capture that, and that's what I really love about this book, because it's also a history of henna that you're kind of telling us. It's almost like a history within a history. So you're telling us the history of henna, it being done, and then the child's experience, and then the
Mhm.
mom talking about the significance or the meaning behind, the designs, the patterns.
Mhm.
And you also have a glossary in the back of the book. Tell us a little bit about that explains some of this.
Right. So the back matter in this book talks a little bit about the origin and history of henna. So the beautiful thing about this tradition or the custom of applying henna is it's celebrated in so many different cultures around the world. So there are communities in South Asia that apply henna for weddings, for religious holidays. There are so many countries and cultures in the Middle East that celebrate the custom of henna. There are communities in Africa. In fact, it is believed that henna was originally found in mummies in the Egyptian civilization. So they would do henna on like the fingers and toes of pharaohs, the kings, the Egyptian kings, before they mummified them. And there's also a theory that henna was used in the desert cultures where it was too hot, and henna has this property of cooling our body, and people would soak their feet and fingers in a henna paste and apply them so they get cooled down in the hot summer nights in the deserts. So so definitely there's some interesting history connected to the origin of henna and how it's common across so many different cultures. So I talk a little bit about that. And then I also say how we actually apply henna. Like the most common way of applying henna is to put it in a cone, and just like you would decorate a cake, like the cupcake decoration that you would do, you would draw designs on your palm, fingers, sometimes up to the forearm, toes, feet. Yeah, so henna tattoo has sort of become very popular even in the West now. And then Sandhya has done a great job of including some designs here that kids can try out, obviously first on paper, before they go around staining everything around them or messing up their own designs. So yeah, so they could try them on paper first, and then when they're confident enough, they could pick up a henna cone at online or at an Indian store and get henna done or do it for their friends. So that's sort of the back matter in the book.
Now, when you originally wrote this, did you set out for it to be like a parallel story?
So I think I did not do it consciously, but because so much of it was drawn from my own memory, and that involved my mother doing it for me, and just where I was, like I was in India, which is like obviously a home away from home for me now. I was thinking about my family, and I was thinking about me now, sort of like recreating that with my daughter. So in that way, I was thinking about how this was being celebrated or passed on from one generation to another. Actually, my grandmother was the one who used to love henna. She had a henna shrub in her backyard, a huge wild one, and she would pick leaves like every time I visited her over summer. And you would see that her fingers, the tips of her fingers were stained permanently, like through the year, because she was always applying henna to someone or the other. And then she would have her own hands done, and just when it was starting to fade, she would start worrying about when the next henna night was. So she really loved henna so much. And when my mother used to apply henna to me, we would talk about how her mother or my grandmother loved henna. So I was thinking about all this, obviously, when I was writing a story about henna. And that's how I think the whole celebration and the honoring of ancestors sort of happened through the story, like poured out of me, even when I was trying to focus on the process of henna, because it was drawn from my own family experience. It sort of found its way into the manuscript, and then it started to sort of like shine like even brighter than the process itself, because then there's that became the heart of the story.
And now, what would you say is the takeaway that you would like people to have after reading this story?
Yeah. In terms of takeaway, obviously it goes back to the power of stories, right? Particularly family stories and family memories. Just telling our stories, passing them down, listening to stories, sort of like tell us about our past, tell us about our history, tell us about where we came from or who we are. So in that sense, they're very powerful. And oral storytelling has been a well-loved, celebrated tradition in many communities around the world. And I think there is so much value and joy in listening to stories and knowing where we come from, or why we live the way we live, or where we live. Just sort of like it takes us back to our roots, or it takes us back to what we might call home. So in that sense, I think stories are very powerful, and especially family stories. And the other takeaway is about traditions, right? Regardless of how old they are, it could be traditions like that have been around for centuries, or it could be traditions that are being passed on from like one generation to another in your family, or it could be something very simple that you are starting like in right now, like it's a very recent tradition. Regardless of that, I think traditions sort of help us honor our loved ones, right? And they always bring us together. And in that way, I think traditions are very special. And that's sort of what I want kids to enjoy and take away from this book, the value in family stories and the joy of traditions.
And now, what was it like working with Sandhya?
There was hardly any work because she was amazing. Yeah, and no, I've known Sandhya through some of her other previous work, and when my editor wrote him, and I agreed that she would be a great pick for this book. We were so happy when she agreed, and she put us on her schedule, and she started working. And then some of the initial sketches, or like the drafts that they shared with me, I was just like, this is it. She got it. Like typically I don't sort of like get married to a vision being a picture book like a creator. Like I know that I'm sharing creative space with an illustrator, and I sort of like I have this big picture sort of vision, but nothing very specific. So I had an open mind, and when she brought in whatever she had done, like in terms of like her initial sketches, I was just like, she's the perfect person. She's brought it alive. And also, the interesting thing is she grew up in the same city that I grew up in India, in Chennai. And she went to the same college that my aunts have been to. And we grew up in a very similar community and culture. And I think in that aspect, like when we talk about the monsoons, or when we talk about the wedding scene and all of that, she sort of like, it was just a natural extension of what I would think and what she would think. So it just all fell in place so beautifully. And I love that she has made it so lush and gardeny and green. And the color palette just works so well for henna and a spring release and a garden theme. So it all worked out great. I couldn't be any more happier with how how wonderful she's been with her art, and all the guidance that we received from our editor Rotem and the art director. It just sort of like came together.
Yeah, it's amazing how everything is just kind of just becoming so magical. And then you're also getting some outstanding reviews. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, we did receive a star from Kirkus. We are so grateful for that, that they saw the beauty and the value in this book. And I think I was so excited when my editor emailed me, and I was like, oh yeah, like this is so amazing. And then she was like, it's such a joy when people see the same the same wonder, or say the same value in a manuscript or the art, whatever it is. Like when people see that, like see what you have seen, then it's everything, right? So we were very grateful and happy about the Kirkus star, and we've had book list that's also is in love with the art. Yeah, so it's already being received well, and we are hoping for children and families to sort of like enjoy the maternal love, or the mother-daughter bonding here,
Mhm.
for families to start talking about the value in family stories, and also obviously like to celebrate henna. There's so much like art and craft potential, like possibilities here. So it's just a beautiful package overall.
I have an idea for an arts and crafts for that book.
I want to hear all about it.
She's like,
Yes.
I want to hear all about it. Yeah, no, um, okay, I actually have this sitting on my desk, so I'm gonna like show it to you. But
Okay.
there are these little hands. I don't know if you can see
Yes, yes.
these little hands
Uh-huh.
that like you can actually, have kids like doodle their
True.
own like little
Yes.
henna on there. That was the one that I was going to share with you for my Kids Need Mentors program. So,
Wow. No, this is
yeah.
so helpful and point on, Nadia, because the way I've been thinking, or in fact, I think I mentioned it to someone about this sort of like an art activity, but I was thinking like kids should first trace their hand and then
Mhm.
cut it out and then start drawing. But this is just so much easier and so much like straightforward than all of that, and less
Yeah.
messier too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm going to pick up that's a great idea,
Yeah.
actually.
Well,
Yeah.
well, they should look familiar to you because remember, we used these before. Remember? For Big 12's
Yeah.
honorary
Oh,
ceremony,
oh,
remember?
oh.
Yeah, we had them
Yes,
on the table as one of the crafts for the kids, and it
right.
was like right next to actually the henna artist that we
Yes,
had.
I
So they
remember seeing that. I remember the henna, but I don't remember, or maybe I just skipped that part. But I remember
yeah.
the henna and the celebration and all of it. Yeah, my
Yeah, so
kids
in
weren't
your
there, so
book,
probably I didn't get to the craft part of it, and then yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So when your book um was
that.
official, I was like, "Ooh, I'm gonna start like collecting these for you so you can,
Uh-huh.
share
Yeah, I'm
that
sure,
because
sure.
it's such a
You thought
cool
about that.
craft."
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, having done the henna thing with the hands, I think, yeah, you connected the dots. Yes.
right. Okay, so now I'm gonna ask you this. So now that you've, put this book out, I mean, all your books are beautiful and a lot of them have like double meanings. Like the other day it really dawned on me like the true value of dumpling day. Like I was all about the foodie aspect of it, and I didn't realize it rhymed, and I didn't realize that like we were counting. I was just like, ooh, dumplings from here, ooh, dumplings from there. And then it's not until I read I guess it was like a blog post someone had up, and they were like, oh, this is a great book for, numbering. And I was like, it's a counting book? I literally had to go back and pull out the book and read it all over again. And
You're
then I
so
realized,
funny, Nadia. I think it's just the foodie in us, right? Like
right,
it
I
just
was like,
like
I
makes
was all about the
everything else
food.
invisible. It's like our eyes are just drawn to the dumplings, and yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, we have all the different, countries that have the different types of dumplings. That was seriously like the only laser focus. So I feel like, when I looked at that and then a couple of your other books, like they have other stronger themes or double
Mhm.
connections. And so I know with A Garden in My Hands that may not have necessarily been the, at the top of the mind for you, but Do you find that you write organically, or do you feel that sometimes you put concepts together, or you dabble in a little bit of both?
Um, I think it really depends on how the story comes out of me. So sometimes it just comes out as a story that I want to tell, and then I start like looking at these layers, right? Like it starts sort of like unraveling slowly, like when people read it, or when like I get feedback from critique partners, then like you said, one person notices one over another, and then these layers start peeling out. So it's just a story to me when I first write it. But sometimes I struggle with plot. I have an idea, I have like I have the heart of the story in me, but I don't know how the story plays out. Like, how do I pace it, or what's the action in it, or what's the plot like? How do I make things move forward? And then I might have to sort of like pause and then very consciously think of some way of telling the story. So like for instance, Dumpling Day, I don't know if you remember, it used to be Dumpling Friends, and I
Right.
had the story about a kid, you know, uh, a new kid in a school trying to make friends, and there are two other kids, and then they all decide to have like a play date at the park. Uh,
Hmm.
um, and they start sharing food, and somehow it didn't work out because it was originally in the school, and then people were like, there could be allergy issues if kids are,
Right.
so it was like always there was a challenge with the plot, like how do I make like these kids celebrate all these different foods. And
Hmm.
then a concept book seemed to be the best way of saying it, because now I could pack in like names of family members, and I could add the rhyme, and like, so and yeah, so sometimes it's like you need to pause, take a step back, and see how to tell a story. But sometimes the story just pours out, and then people are always resonating with different threads in the story.
And which of all your stories would you say right now that are finally out, coming to fruition, that um, has the most meaning to you, or you think has impacted your readership?
Oh, that's a
Okay, I'm not going to
really,
ask you to
really
choose
hard
about choose your
question.
favorite. Okay, I'm trying not to ask you, but sometimes.
It's just so hard, right? Because yeah, it's like what people tell you, like they reach out and tell you for like every book is why you I mean that's the only thing that keeps you going, right? uh like with Yellow Suitcase, which was my debut, it was a grief story, and I remember
Mhm.
standing in front of kids in classrooms talking about that story, and I would have kids raise their hand or stand up and share a very moving personal experience about death, how a loved one was like diagnosed with a terminal illness, or remembering a loved one's funeral, or a grandmother who had just passed on. So that was a very powerful experience, to have kids open up to me, so in that way, that was a very powerful story, and also my debut. So that was really um, uh, like a very powerful start to my journey. But in terms of like gift for Amma, for instance, like I had people just being so excited about seeing the word Amma, which is the word for mother in Tamil, on a book cover.
Mhm.
Like that, there's so many families, like you talked about, putting South India in the map when it comes to
Right.
India itself. Like it is not a monolith. There are so many different cultures. There are so many regional foods. People speak so many different languages,
Mhm.
um, and to have that sort of representation of uh, a city in South India, or cities, or I would say, of families in living in South India, the South Indian language, speaking Tamil. So that was truly like a big moment for many families, and to share that with me, like how they felt when they saw that, that was powerful in its own way. And Dumpling Day being like I see so many educators and librarians getting excited about the potential it has to open up conversations about, like, in say geography, or about food, about your own heritage. Like, what food would you make if you were to celebrate your heritage? Or like like a passport. That book is sort of like a passport to going around the world. So in its own way, it's very special. And then Between Two Worlds, that again, to me, it was very, very meaningful, because it was probably one of the very first South Asian biographies, picture book biographies, like a biography of uh, an artist of Indian descent. She was bicultural, Indian Hungarian, but to have that in a picture book, it was probably one of the first. Of course, there were books on Kamala Harris, and like there's Malala from like, picture book biographies on Malala. Like there, but from we are so used to seeing picture book biographies or like celebrating artists like from the West. Their art is always like patriarchal. It's like, it's Western, but to sort of center this feminist woman, like this feminist artist, I'm sorry, from from like a bicultural family is definitely, to me, it meant the world to me to put that story out there. And got in my hands again, like you said, all these layers that we have, the threads, like celebrating a custom that is universally like well loved, also to have this Indian American family represented in this story. So I guess every story or every book is special in its own way.
Now, out of all of us who are in the critique group, and we have books coming out, you're the most prolific of us at the moment, with like all your books coming out, and like and they each are contributing to the kidlit landscape in a way that is so beautiful, so meaningful. Like, what is your creative process like when you think about, oh, I did this book, and now it's touched upon this? Like, what is next for you? Like, what else do you want to talk about or write about but you haven't yet, or maybe is in the works?
No, first of all, I have to politely disagree that I am not the most prolific, or that is like there is no better, more, most, or none of that. There's none of that. And and like you know this about me. I do not write a whole lot of stories at a particular time, right? Like I take one project, then I just like beat it to death. Like I just can't let go. And then I'm stuck with the same story. And sometimes I know you guys would tell me like, can we see something else for a change? Because we're sort of like losing our discretion, like with the critiquing, because we've been seeing this so many. Yeah, like, so as opposed to like you, or like, some of our other friends who have like so many to sort of like juggle with, right? So I really take my time to tell a story, like to see what I want to write. I let the idea simmer in my head, and then like by the time it comes out, I'm sort of like going through the plot or the arc a little more, and then I start putting words on paper, right? So yeah, so going back to my creative process, it's typically like everyday experiences or things that bother me about just the injustices happening around us, or maybe something like I see or hear a kid do or say. Anything could be a prompt to a theme. So it's generally the heart of the story that comes first to me. I'm like, I need to write a story about this, or I need to tell a story that would make people think differently about this, or like, I want to change this, like something very lofty. And then I start thinking about like, oh, like, how would my character, what would my character be like, or like, where should this be set, or like, what's going to be the plot to tell the story. And then I let it simmer for some weeks maybe, or even sometimes months, and then I sort of like wait for it to come out of me. And I know they say this in like the writing world a lot, but it personally doesn't work for me, is that I do not write every day at all. I write when I feel like, I write when I feel that creative energy. And then it's always sort of like helped me to 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 get the words out of me, the right words. So I don't write every day, but I think reading books, like obviously in the category or the genre that I'm writing or working in, and then sort of putting them away. So I mean, I take that as an inspiration and then I put them away and then let the idea simmer. And then when I feel like telling the story, then I start putting words on paper.
Now, do you see yourself maybe writing in a different genre or format in the future?
I do see myself writing like a verse novel, because of the fact that somehow most of my picture books have been lyrical, like Gift from I was lyrical, like Between Two Worlds was very sort of like poetic, again lyrical. A Garden in My Hands is also like a verse style. It's so I'm starting to think, maybe that's actually like in me somewhere, and I would, I do want to write a verse novel, but I think being a picture book writer for so many years, we've been trained to make every word count, and like, brevity is the hallmark of our craft. So I think it'll be quite a shift to start like writing a novel. So it's kind of intimidating and overwhelming a little bit, but I hope to find the space and the right time for me to give that a shot. Maybe like I have, like going back to your previous question on what's in the pipe, I do have a picture book, which obviously you've seen for several years, called the Spice Box, coming out in the spring of 2024, again from Knopf Penguin Random House. So I think after that, maybe I will pause a little bit, catch my breath and sort of like maybe try my hand at a verse novel. I don't know. I'm just thinking here in this moment, manifesting it.
Yes, we're manifesting it. Because it's always good to diversify, right? That's what they tell us to, yes, we know you write in this genre, but it would, would you ever consider or think about writing in a different genre? Because you never know what story,
Right.
other story that you can tell.
But I think for me, one of the main reasons I chose to even write picture books was because we talk a lot about representation and diversity and inclusion, all of that, right? But I somehow feel that we think there's a certain age to talk about that, or there's certain, and it's sort of like more easier to see these things happening in, like, say, for books for grown-ups or for older kids and YA. But I like, it is like, I don't see that as often being done in literature for the younger kids. So we still have so much work to do in that area. Like, like there's so many more stories that we need to tell in, like, for kids in the picture book age, because they're like, we have like these themes about like virtues and like talking animals, and we have dinosaurs and unicorns and all fairies and all of that we sort of like keep recycling, which is great, which is amazing. But I think it's also like we sort of forget, and we feel like we don't leave room for these stories, like, like when we talk about like uplifting voices and representation, all of that. So I want to do that, like, for the youngest of among us, like in the board books and in the picture books and in the early picture books and concept books, so much that it gets normalized. Like, we should not be slotting it as multicultural book. We should not be slotting a book as diversity book or none of that. So I still want, that's also the reason why I sort of like want to focus on the board books and the picture books and the concept books, because there's so much more work to be done in that space as well. And I don't want the littles to be sort of like sidelined or forgotten. Like,
Right. You don't want them left out. And I like that you're saying that because my philosophy on that as well. We share um a very similar thought process about the use of certain words to
right.
reflect books that we're writing. And it can I don't want to speak for you, but when you see the word diverse or you see the word multicultural um attached to your book or my book or someone else who is BIPOC, right? Black, Indigenous, person of color. We know that these terms were formulated to help um, help bring to light that there's a lack of representation, but at the same time, these are words that have become bandwagon terms, for lack of a better term, but that's what I call it. Like it's a bandwagon term where um, people just use it and they throw it around, but they don't understand the significance of it. It's kind of like, as a person of color, you already have all these labels, and then to have to be like, yeah, you can use it, but like that's not like it just doesn't work for me. It as someone who is BIPOC or marginalized, it's kind of like it's adding more labels and pushing me down further. So, how do you feel about that? Like with those words or those terms?
Like I said, it's just a start. It's just a beginning. There's so many things that are not right with the vocabulary that we see thrown so often, like that people have come to use, or we are using it all also on a daily basis because of the lack of like the right vocabulary or how to communicate what we are, how we feel about all of this. But I think it's like, I think of it as an evolution. uh we have so much more work to do. It's a long road, windy road, bumpy road. I started writing as a way to bring change, like in my own small way. It's sort of like it's my way of fighting all of this through my stories, one book at a time, one story at a time. uh, so we just have to keep fighting the good fight, uh, hold on to hope, um, you know, correct ourselves, and keep chugging along. Right. But I completely hear you. Like I have, it just like makes me cringe when I hear some of the labels, some of the vocabulary that we've all come to use. I still see so many of my books like, under a list that is specifically for like diverse books, right? Like, what does it even mean, like diverse books? Like, you diversify your bookshelf and you have read all types of stories as a verb, but how can
Mhm.
you use it as an adjective? Like, this is not a diverse book. So yeah,
Yeah.
so we can go on and on about that, but
Yeah. And how do you feel like that plays into also the slew of like censorship challenges, book banning that we're seeing because a lot of the books that are being banned right now or like kids are being told they can't read are like books about
right.
themselves.
I mean, it just angers me so much, and it saddens me very, very deeply. And I've had my own book being objected for like different reasons. And like I said, I will not give up. Uh, we should keep fighting. Uh, our kids deserve better. So
And now
we're all in this together: educators, librarians, families, parents, caregivers, writers, creatives of all kinds. Like, we are in this together, and we will keep fighting and putting the stories out there, uh, and hope for a better world.
now if you had to define um your body of work,
Mhm.
what term or what word would you say encapsulates everything that you're doing? She's like, oh, come on, Nadia, why'd you ask me that?
Yeah, I thought we were not going to do labels and like
Yeah,
names
we're
and
not
all.
going to do labels, but we want like, when people I know what I would refer to your work as.
Really?
I do. I do.
Uh, would you like to share that? Because I'd
No, I'm
love to
not,
hear.
because I'm putting you on the spot right now.
Oh,
But I'll tell you after.
I
This is
don't
your
know
interview.
one word, but definitely my work focuses on I don't know, it's something that I gravitate towards. It's like I want to talk about places and people and experiences that are being invisible, that are less visible in children's books. So I'm sort of like drawn to like, oh, we never talk about this. Let's talk about the arc of grieving, right? Like that's how Yellow Suitcase, like we don't talk about death, we don't talk about it, it's so important, but we need to be talking more about something that's so universal and something that all of us experience at some point. And same way, so there's, I don't see books set in places outside of the US as often. So let me set it in Chennai, which, or in South India, which
Right.
is sort of like the setting is the character, is a main character in the book. So I'm sort of drawn towards that. So I I hope that is a good thing and that I'll keep doing that. So we get to, our children get to like, get to see more places that we don't often see and talk about experiences that we sort of avoid and shy away from in children's books. And that makes my journey harder, definitely. It's not, right? It's sort of self-inflicted, self-imposed, but yeah. So that's sort of how my body of work has come to be what it is.
Yeah, I feel your body of work is without boundaries.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
It's without
More or
boundaries.
less.
Yeah.
Yes. I actually used to have that in my bio where I said like, where I'd said like I was always fantasizing about a world with no boundaries and no borders, right? And
Yeah.
that's, yeah,
And
I
that's what
like
you write
that.
about.
I like that. That's very powerful.
It is. And then you know, I also feel that you're very impassioned when you're writing about your stories. Like everything comes from a heartfelt, genuine place, and there's always a lot of emotion attached to it. And I love how now, I mean, I don't want to speak for you because I'm going to throw this to you. How do you feel that publishing is changing in terms of um, not having quotas and not having like the token stories? Like how do you feel about that with
Yeah,
publishing?
we've come a long way from what we were actually offering kids even a few years ago or until a decade ago. We've come a long way. Um, uh, in terms of also having new voices, putting out new voices, right? Like, and also telling stories that we have not often seen in books, setting it in places like I was just like we were talking about outside of the US, like our stories used to be a lot more insular. I feel now we are sort of opening up the world. We are talking about more experiences. We are seeing children of color on book covers. We are, having this. We are sort of like reaching out to creatives from around the world, thanks to technology and all of that. Because most of my illustrators do not live in the US or were not born in the US. So we had like Between Two Worlds illustrated by Ruchi, who's born and raised and continues to live in India.
Mhm.
I had like a Mexican artist illustrate Dumpling Day. So which is how it should be, right? Like so there's a lot of things that have changed, but we still have a long way to go too. I would love to see stories and experiences that are more nuanced, like you were talking about tokenism, right? Like stories that don't have to have this one thing that everyone can connect with, or like, and we sort of like have to have that stamp and then we sort of work around it, versus it's okay to share something that kids haven't heard about, or something that no one knows about, and it's okay to learn and enjoy that and benefit from that and celebrate that. So taking that tokenism out, and same thing with language. Even like I grew up in India, and I was used to like the British English and versus like the American English, and sometimes when I write, or even like with cultures that are used to oral storytelling. Like I was raised by elders who shared stories with me every night, caregivers who are elders who shared stories with me just by mouth. So there's a texture that we bring to writing, which is not the very mainstream way of writing. So even when it comes to craft, I think we still need to be more open to, taking in all those voices with the textured writing and the nuanced stories, the new themes, and yeah. So I would love to see, and I am seeing some of them come out. So it's a good thing. We are in the right direction. We are headed the right way, and we just need to keep doing what we are doing without being it like a trend, or without sort of like losing steam. Yeah.
And now this will be my last question. What would you say is the biggest change for you in writing this story? What's like the biggest lesson learned, would you say?
In writing Garden in My Hands?
Garden in My Hands.
The biggest lesson, I think, is just writing from your heart. Like going back to what we were talking before we started this podcast recording about how the story was born, right? Like it was the spring of 2020, and the world had just shut down. The Black Lives Matter movement had started. The protests were being planned. There was so much darkness around, right? There was fear and pain and hurt and hate all around. And just like everyone else, I was trying to stay afloat, keep it together, focusing on family and health and maybe work. And fortunately, I was working on a couple of books with my editors then that was keeping me busy. And we had this retreat coming up. And there was so much darkness around. And I realized that I was desperately trying to find hope and joy. I was thinking about my family back in India. I was missing mom. I was looking at my kids, like what was the world going to be like tomorrow? And then trying to hold on to these memories from my own childhood and thinking about my kids' childhood, and all of that came together in in My Hands, right? It all just poured out, and it was one of the fastest stories that I've written, right? Because some of my, like Spice Box, which is coming out next year, it's a story really, really close to my heart, but it took me several years before I could have it in in the way it is now. But some stories, they just pour out of your heart, and you just have to let that happen, like allow it to come out of you, and it will. And that gives me hope that even when there are days that are dark, when there's no hope, be it the world around you or be it in my own creativity, I just have to wait for that moment for that to happen, and it will come out, just like how A Garden in My Hands came out.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, there are a few ways to help Picturebooking out and shape what this show is. You can subscribe and rate the podcast on whatever player you are listening to right now, and send this episode to your book friends. Have you read a fantastic book lately, or have a creator in mind that we need to have on? Subscribe to the Picturebooking newsletter at picturebooking.com/listen. And we'll let you know when we are ready to book future episodes.